Good evening. Thank you guys so much for joining us. I'm Lucas Lidner. I'm the Workforce Development and Advocacy Director for the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. We're so pleased to present this forum in partnership with the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service, in addition to the UWSP at Wausau, all presented by Nicolet National Bank. At the Chamber, we're committed to being a voice for economic advocacy and advancing policies that promote business growth, innovation, and opportunities. Economic advocacy means supporting a strong, dynamic business environments where employees can thrive, jobs are created, and individuals can achieve economic security. It means activating and engaging with policymakers to ensure that local businesses have the tools, resources, and regulatory framework they need to succeed. A critical part of this is providing the opportunity for our communities to learn, engage, and advocate for things they believe in. This evening's event features 5 candidates who are here to share their platforms for what they will do on behalf of our communities and state, whether it be in Madison or Washington, D.C. Tonight, you'll have the opportunity to hear directly from the candidates, not from a text message, a commercial, a social media ad, or even a phone call. But you'll hear their response right here on this stage so that you can keep that response in mind when you head to the voting booth, if you haven't already, in 12 short days. At this time, I'd like to introduce our moderator for this evening's forum. He's the founding and current director of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service, a unit of the Universities of Wisconsin, Eric Giordano.
Good evening, and thank you, Lucas, for your opening remarks. Before we welcome our first candidate to the stage, I would like to remind all of us here tonight that this forum is a setting for sharing ideas and platforms. Therefore, we ask attendees to be respectful to our candidates and to one another. With that, any disruptors will be asked to leave the facility immediately. Lastly, it would be really appreciated if all of us could please silence our cell phones at this time. Each candidate will be asked 5 questions on critical topics facing our communities that the partner organizations have put forward for this evening. They will have an allotted time to answer and will be limited to the prearranged time. Without further ado, I would like to get started with our first race of the evening, the National Senate race. Unfortunately, Senator Tammy Baldwin will not be able to join us this evening due to a scheduling conflict. That being so, please welcome our first participant, Mr. Eric Hovde. Mr. Hovde, thank you so much for joining us. We'd like you to take the next 5 minutes to please introduce yourself and your platform.
Sure. I'm Eric Hovde. I'm a 4th-generation Wisconsinite, born down in the Madison area. Went through public schools, graduated Madison East High, and then went on to become a UW Badger, proud Badger, class of 1986. They got a big game tomorrow against Penn State. I'm your classic entrepreneur. I kind of had a knack for business, so after I left college, I went off into the workforce, started my first company in my mid-20s, and then started building multiple different companies. At the age of 27, I got hit with a diagnosis of having multiple sclerosis. Let me tell you, that rocks your world. Didn't know how to quite process it, but continued to charge on. But I tell you that because it led to something else in my life that was significant, and that was starting my Hovde Foundation. My foundation I started in the mid to late 90s, first funding medical research in multiple sclerosis. But then I pivoted and started focusing on rescuing children around the world and in this country. I've been fighting against sex trafficking, and rescuing children that have been abandoned to the streets. So we have 4 homes in Africa, Ghana, Rwanda, Mombasa, Kenya, Malawi, and then we have 5 homes in Central and South America. Guatemala, Honduras, Costa Rica, Bolivia, and Peru. Each have a little bit of difference. Costa Rica, we rescue young girls that have been sold into the sex trade. In Ghana, we're rescuing young children that are sold into slavery. So it's been a big part of my life. We do a lot in this country as well as battling sex trafficking in this country, and fund food banks and do a variety of different things. I'm married. I've been blessed with a wonderful wife, 2 daughters, and 3 grandchildren. So why would a guy with a really pretty good life end up getting into this ugly business called politics, where you run from morning to night every single day? This is my, I think, 5th event, and I got one after this. And you wake up every morning being attacked and told crazy things like, I'm from California. No, I'm not, and I don't live in California. Never have been a resident of California. So why did I do it? It's real simple. I love my country. We've been blessed to live in the greatest country in the history of mankind that's provided more civil liberties, freedoms, and prosperity than any country has ever provided its citizens. And, you know, I've been in 100 countries around the world, and every time I travel abroad, I'm always thankful when I come back home. In saying that, what has unfolded in our country for some time, but particularly the last 4 years, has me deeply concerned at multiple different levels. And I can't really even believe the conversations we have in our country today. What is right has become wrong, and what is wrong has become right. We're bankrupting our country. We've racked up more debt in the last 3.5 years than our country's first 230 years. That is why we have the worst bout of inflation we've seen in 40 years. Because when you spend that much money, the Federal Reserve has to buy that debt and increase the money supply. And that's what ignited the cost of inflation for food, clothing, housing, health care. I'm concerned about our domestic security. First, the push to defund the police, and then open our southern border. We've brought in 15 to 20 million illegal immigrants in our country. We know that, you know, Venezuela's entered their jail cells into our country. We had a horrible incident over in Perdochin, a town of 5,000 people, where a woman and her daughter were brutally raped and assaulted for over a day in this small Wisconsin town. It's also helped lead to the fentanyl crisis. We lost 108,000 Americans last year, 112,000 Americans the year before. This poison's produced in China. It's shipped over to the drug cartels in Mexico and then brought up over our southern border. I'm concerned about our international security. The world's engulfed in conflict today. It doesn't have to be this way. I think it's a direct result of our botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. And don't get me wrong, I had no problem wrapping up the war, but how they did it, they left Americans behind. 13 Marines died that day. We left billions of dollars of military equipment behind. Lastly, I'm concerned about the division in our country. We've become way too divided. We put on our blue jersey or red jersey. We listen to our own media, our own echo chambers, and don't listen to each other. And I believe we have to put on the red, white, and blue jersey and come together and get things done in this country. So that's why I got into this race, what I'm concerned about. Look, there's a lot of other issues like how to fix our healthcare system, how to produce more affordable housing for young people or our whole population, but it's really impacting young people.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Let's jump into a specific policy question. Given Wisconsin's challenges with retaining young talent and filling skilled labor gaps, what initiatives would you support to ensure our state develops a sustainable workforce and attracts professionals to stay and grow their careers here?
Sure. Well, there's a number of things that we need to provide good labor and good opportunities. A lot of those, honestly, are more at the state level and less at the federal level. It's more a job of the governor and the state legislative body to create that. Taxation policies, regulatory policies, and the rest. But there's a couple things that I think need to be done at the federal government level. I think we need, like Bill Clinton did, welfare reform. We have more working age Americans out of the workforce right now than we've ever had in our country. I believe in the dignity of work, and we know when people are not engaged in work, there's much more likely a path to go down, a path that's destructive, alcoholism, drug use, and the rest. So when Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich did welfare reform back in the 90s, it helped bring a lot of people back into our workforce and help create growth. Second, I talked about closing our southern border, which we need to do, but we also have to fix legal immigration. And to allow good people that want to come to our country. Our legal immigration system is fundamentally broken. We don't give people that are trying to come a timeline. They should be given an up or down answer within a reasonable time frame. If they are indicated that they will be able to come into this country, then you should tell them the requirements they have to do. I think we could also move to a point system. Like Canada and a lot of countries. We're short doctors and nurses in this country. We have a healthcare crisis. So one of the things that we could do is like Canada does, if they have a need in their society, if you're a nurse or a doctor, you get more points, so you get more expedited process to get into our country. But fundamentally, we've got to create a playing field in the state that wants to keep young people in the state and to attract businesses to stay in it than moving their businesses either to someplace in the south where they have lower tax rates or even worse, outside our country altogether.
Thank you. We're on to question 2. With rural and urban areas both needing economic support, how would you ensure that economic development efforts in Wisconsin benefit the entire state, balancing the needs of both urban and rural?
Again, that's a little bit more weighted to the state, the governor, or state legislative body. But at the federal government level, what you want to do is to create a playing field that attracts business, that wants them to stay here and create economic growth. Look, at one point, we had the highest corporate tax rate in the world. It disincentivized business from producing and manufacturing here. That's why we hollowed out so many towns all across America, in this state, but all throughout the upper Midwest. You know, factories or manufacturing plants would say, I can move this manufacturing plant to China or Vietnam, and I can just ship my goods back in, and I can avoid paying a high corporate tax rate. So fortunately, corporate tax rates were brought lower. We do have an issue with small business corporate tax rates coming up in 2025 that I believe need to be extended, because otherwise, if we don't do that, small businesses that are structured as subchapter S and LLCs, unlike big corporations, are structured as C corporations, they'll be paying a much higher tax. And look, we've got to put a focus on small business because they're the job engines. They're the ones that create jobs in our country. And we don't want the taxation policies where small business are big competitive disadvantages to large businesses.
Thank you. Speaking of a positive business climate, many Wisconsin businesses feel burdened by complex regulations. What specific regulatory reform would you prioritize to reduce regulatory barriers and foster a business-friendly environment while maintaining necessary protections?
Look, I've been in so many businesses. I started off in a business earlier today over in the western part of our state. I am a business guy. I have started multiple different companies in Wisconsin and all over this country. It's the #1 biggest issue for business and small business is the amount of regulations. So if you look back, the last time we had the highest rates of inflation that we were confronting was when Ronald Reagan took over. And inflation had been surging throughout the late 60s and 70s because of the massive spending that happened in the 60s. So they took interest rates up to 21% to crack inflation, but they had to get the economy going. So President Reagan's, his first big push was deregulation because the regulatory code became so intensive that weighed on businesses. Well, the interesting thing is we have more regulations today than when Ronald Reagan did that in 1981. It's estimated the cost of regulations are $3 trillion a year. I go to farms. I've been on so many farms in the last 8.5 months as I've been doing this campaign. It's the #1 biggest issue farmers talk about. Most farmers will say, I love and care for my land if the government would just get out of the way, the amount of regulations. They're trying to pass right now, and they're very deeply concerned about WOTUS, Waters of the United States, which would literally say a pond on a farm would be treated like a navigable waterway, like on Lake Michigan. So I think we need a comprehensive review of our regulatory structure. You know, there's rarely any time one regulation that's the problem. It's the myriad of regulations. My main business is banking outside my real estate company, and the amount of regulations I've seen in community banking literally grow over the last 30 years is tremendous. Probably a third of my workforce touches regulations in a meaningful way, and every one of my colleagues touches regulations every day. So I think we got to bring down the regulatory structure because there has been no governor by Washington and a lot of regulatory bodies to say, is this sensible? Does this compete? Because it's the worst thing is in business, if you do it this way, you're breaking that regulation, and if you do the opposite, you're breaking that regulation, because nobody at this agency ever talked to that agency, so they put you in a box where you're damned if you do and damned if you don't.
Thank you. We're going to shift gears to corporate taxes. Wisconsin's corporate tax structure is often seen as less competitive than other states. What tax reforms would you advocate for to make Wisconsin more attractive to businesses while ensuring fiscal responsibility?
Sure. Again, all I could do is advocate at the U.S. Senate because, again, that's for the governor and state senators and the state assembly. But it's very clear, and anybody that argues with this, is just ignoring the facts. Capital will flow to where it's least taxed. If you are an investor or own a business, you're going to invest where you get the highest rates of return on your capital. Well, Wisconsin is now one of the least competitive states in the upper Midwest, which is very unfortunate. And you'll see the growth in places like Florida, Texas, Nevada, states that have a zero tax rate. So, look, I think Wisconsin and the governor and the state legislative body needs to sit down and really look at the tax, system here and try to lower the rates to make us more competitive. Indiana is probably the most competitive of the upper Midwest states and is one of the cleaner and lower tax rates of the upper Midwest states. Surprise, surprise. So again, it's not something that I would touch as a U.S. Senator. I'd be dealing with U.S. tax code policy. And for, to make America competitive, obviously we want to keep corporate tax rates low so we don't drive business out of this country and jobs out of this country. And it's very important for people to understand when you talk about corporate taxation, corporations will pass on whatever that tax. It really ends up being a tax on the consumer, and it's a tax if they're too high on employees because, again, businesses will just say, well, I can produce it cheaper in Mexico and ship it back into the United States and wipe out the jobs that they would have otherwise had here.
Thank you. We're on to our last question for the evening. Given the current national economic uncertainties that you mentioned earlier, how would you ensure that Wisconsin's business climate remains resilient, offering stability and growth opportunities for both large corporations and small businesses?
That's a great question, and that, again, a lot of it ties back to the state, but there's other things that can be done. Look, one of the most important things we need to fix, I'll take two, is one, our education system. I don't know if people realize, but only 27% of our children can read at grade level in the state of Wisconsin. That's unfortunate. If you're in the city of Milwaukee, I think it's 9%, lesser proficient than math at that level. That's wrong. I mean, we need to improve our education system. We need to get our education system back to reading, writing, and arithmetic. We need an educated workforce because Any employer wants to hire people that have a certain level of education. Along with that, one thing that I really believe in is trade schools. We're desperately short skilled labor, welders, electricians, plumbers in this country. And you know, one of the things that Wisconsin always had was great skilled laborers, carpenters, again, plumbers, electricians. But a lot of these professions, you look at the average age of a nuclear grade welder. That's the highest level of welder. They can weld on power plants, on shipyards, all the rest. I think the average age is now 61 or 62. So we need a lot of younger people coming behind them for that. Another big issue that we really have to deal with is our healthcare system. Our healthcare system is breaking. Now, you know, I've said that we need a major restructuring of the Affordable Care Act. If you go back when they passed Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, there was 3 promises made. President Obama spoke constantly about this. It'll lower the cost of health care, will improve the access to health care, and, oh, by the way, you'll be able to keep your family doctor. Everything one of those things has failed. The cost of health care has spiked even more higher at a faster rate. Access to care has collapsed, and the family doctor, it pretty much wiped away the family doctor. So there's a lot of things that we can do in our healthcare system. Look, I believe in pre-existing conditions. That was the one thing as a person with MS. But I'll give you just one example. One of the flaws of the Affordable Care Act is it let monopolies and oligarchies to be created. So in Madison, we allowed the biggest hospital system to buy the second biggest hospital system, and they now control over 60% of the market. You think you're going to get any real competition in that kind of market? That's why Madison has higher healthcare costs than places in New York City or in California. It's crazy. Another issue with our healthcare system is everything you buy in life, everything you buy, whether it's groceries, clothing, electronics, you name it, a car, there's a price. You know what it is. You try to go get a medical surgery or procedure done at a hospital, good luck in getting a price. They'll give you an 800 number. You'll call. You'll spend 2-3 hours on the phone. By the time they give you a price, you'll get it. You go get your medical procedure. You come back out, and months later, you'll get billed something fundamentally different than what they told you it would be. So we need price transparency desperately in our healthcare system. And then lastly, we have to close the southern border, because when you have 18 to 20 million illegal immigrants using our healthcare system and they're paying nothing into it, folks, there's no such thing as a free lunch. That cost has to get transferred. So where does that cost get transferred to? It gets transferred to all Americans and all the people in Wisconsin. So unfortunately, in one of my businesses, we already got a renewal rate for our healthcare costs, and it's going to rise by another double-digit number again. So we've got to address our healthcare system, and by getting our healthcare more accessible and dealing with the cost, dealing with our education system, keeping tax rates low, addressing excessive regulation, I think that creates the playing field to keep a Wisconsin economy very vibrant.
Mr. Hovde, it looks like our time is up. Thank you so much for taking time from your very busy schedule and participating in tonight's forum, and best of luck on November 5th.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful night.
All right, we're going to stay in the federal races, and we would now like to move on to the congressional race for District 7. We're pleased now to welcome to the stage Mr. Kyle Kilbourn. Welcome, Mr. Kilbourn. Thank you so much for joining us. We'd like you to take the first 5 minutes to introduce yourself and your platform.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight. I grew up in a small town on a 1-acre farm. My dad was a construction worker. My mom was a waitress. We weren't rich, but we worked hard. And I was able to achieve my American dream through working hard and taking advantage of opportunities. Today, it's getting harder and harder to do that, especially in our rural areas. I'm running to revitalize the American dream for the middle-class Americans. My work has always been about finding solutions to make life better for everyday people. And that's why I'm running for Congress, because Washington is broken and Wisconsin is being left behind. We need fresh leadership to tackle the issues that matter most to our communities and our families, not the same divisive politics that got us here. I built a career as a product designer. I've worked in healthcare, retail, and design industries. I have a PhD in product design and a bachelor in life sciences. I am the only candidate on this stage tonight to have worked in 2 different Fortune 500 companies, a nonprofit healthcare system, and as a professor. And so whether it was conducting research about aging in place for seniors or understanding convenience store owners and users, I listened to find underlying values. I've worked with executives, patients, healthcare workers, delivery drivers, and many others to develop market-facing solutions. In Congress, I will listen to constituents to develop the solutions to the biggest problems facing our region. Leadership isn't about how many cable news shows you go on, or if you can make the decisions because you're the owner of the company. It's about how you work with the nearly 9,000 staffers and the 435 representatives in Congress. In my previous role, I worked at a headquarters where there was 10,000 employees. And we brought to life strategies that affected the lives of millions of Americans. We need collaborators to get things done, especially as we just witnessed one of the least productive Congresses in over a century. I've traveled around the district in 26 counties talking to folks from all walks of life. 3 themes consistently come up. 1, supporting working families to tackle the cost of living, from healthcare to housing. 2, focusing on our future by leading on climate action and protecting our natural resources. And then 3, fighting for our freedoms, especially healthcare decisions. When I'm elected, I'll fight to protect healthcare access, lower costs, and strengthen Social Security for our seniors. I'm running because I believe we deserve better. We deserve a representative who listens, works hard, and gets results. Not someone who plays partisan politics and looks out for big corporations. We can build a better future together for Wisconsin's 7th Congressional District.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And now we'll turn to those policy questions. Given Wisconsin's challenges with retaining young talent and filling skilled labor gaps, what initiatives would you support to ensure that our state develops a sustainable workforce and attracts professionals to stay and grow their careers here?
Yeah, like many young people in rural areas, I felt I had to leave to get a good job. Growing up in a small town, we had a convenience store, a post office, and a grain elevator. And so, success seems like I had to leave. We need to change that narrative. We need to make Wisconsin a place where people can stay, grow, and get not just by, but get ahead. One key to retaining talent is supporting our educators and making sure we have training institutions. Expanding incentive programs to train more educators in the professions we need for our future is a smart investment. This means supporting experiential learning opportunities across the region and reducing barriers to education, like wraparound services such as transportation and childcare, so more people can pursue their training without affecting their livelihoods. We also need to expand our apprenticeship programs and work-based learning models. Wisconsin is already a leader in this area, but we can incentivize businesses to do even more. Unfortunately, in Washington, people like to focus on more tax breaks for corporations than on workforce development, leaving our communities like ours behind. Healthcare is another factor. Expanding Medicaid would allow Wisconsin to use $1.6 billion to support strategic workforce incentives and initiatives. It's disappointing that some have chosen to play politics with our healthcare expansion, blocking the investments we need to create a sustainable workforce. We also need to address the cost and the availability of childcare, which is a major barrier to workforce participation. The Child Care for Every Community Act, a federal bill I support, will ensure families have access to affordable, high-quality childcare. Ignoring this need only makes it harder for working families and small businesses to thrive. And when we sell off our lands and resources to the highest corporate bidders, we further hasten the brain drain by stripping away the natural beauty and resources that make our communities worth it. By making these smart investments, we can create a Wisconsin where people want to stay, grow, and contribute, building a stronger future for all of us.
Thank you. Here in the 7th Congressional District, rural and urban areas both need economic support. So how would you ensure that economic development efforts in Wisconsin benefit the entire state and, of course, our district balancing the needs of both urban and rural.
Yeah, this country depends on products our rural communities provide. Farming, forestry, and other products. Yet when it comes to economic development, rural areas are often left behind. We need a federal rural strategy, and maybe even a dedicated cabinet position to ensure our rural communities have the infrastructure and resources to thrive. Right now, many areas in our district don't even have basic cell phone coverage or even reliable internet access, let alone broadband. How can we expect businesses to grow or young people to stay when they can't even get online? So we can start by passing the Rebuild Rural America Act, which would establish a $50 billion grant fund to expand rural job creation. This bill will create federal training and technical support, establish a Rural Future Corps to expand essential services like childcare and job training, and provide long-term, locally controlled funding for our rural revitalization plans. This isn't just about throwing money at the problem. It's about empowering our rural communities to build their own futures. We also need to support small businesses and family farms by enforcing antitrust laws and ending corporate subsidies that disproportionately benefit big corporations. It's time we put Main Street over Wall Street by providing grants and loans to small businesses on terms they can afford and quicker and easier application process. Let's require state and federal agencies to meet local procurement targets, ensuring they're buying from local farms and businesses. Rebuilding our small town centers is another key to long-term success. We need to diversify and revitalize these areas to attract new businesses and retain young talent. That means making broadband universal and upgrading our transportation system. It's vital we connect our urban and rural areas together so they can benefit from each other. What's definitely not working is selling off our lands to foreign mining companies. These companies come in, destroy our landscapes, offer no real job growth for Main Street. They leave us to pick up the pieces, and that's not economic development, that's exploitation. And finally, we must fully fund our rural schools. We need to expand investments in our community colleges, technical programs, and experiential learning programs. Education is a foundation for a sustainable economy, and we need to make sure that our rural students have the same access to the same opportunities as their urban counterparts. It's time we stop playing politics with our rural communities and start delivering real solutions.
Thank you. Turning to another topic here, many Wisconsin businesses feel burdened by complex regulations. What specific regulatory reform would you prioritize to reduce regulatory barriers and foster a business-friendly environment while maintaining necessary protections?
Yeah, it's important to balance the needs of regulations with fostering a business-friendly environment. Cannot be overstated, especially in small towns where I grew up. People there knew how to run a business, without being bogged down by bureaucratic overhead. Small businesses are the backbone of our rural economies, and we need to ensure they're supported, not overwhelmed by red tape. So first, we need to modernize our regulations for small businesses, our farming economy, and entrepreneurs. We should pass right-to-repair legislation that empowers farmers and individuals to fix their own equipment instead of being tied to expensive corporate repair services. This would cut down on unnecessary costs for our rural communities and allow businesses to grow, not fighting corporate monopolies. It's a perfect example where we can ease the regulatory burden while protecting our local economies. We also need to streamline occupational licensing. Too often, entrepreneurs trying to work across state lines or workers moving between states face complex and inconsistent licensing requirements. Simplifying this process through multi-state licensing agreements or removing unnecessary barriers will help businesses attract talent and operate more efficiently. And lastly, we need to build a network of business incubators and innovation hubs to support small businesses and local suppliers. These hubs will provide access to technical assistance and capital to help small business grow and innovate. All right, and then finally, what we don't need in Washington are those who prioritize billion-dollar corporations over small businesses that fuel our local economy. The balance between regulation and innovation is essential, and we need leaders dedicated to small businesses, not corporate interests that siphon resources from our communities.
Thank you. Wisconsin's corporate tax structure is often seen as less competitive than other states. What tax reforms would you advocate for to make Wisconsin more attractive to businesses while ensuring fiscal responsibility?
Yeah, Wisconsin has been a production hub, and we have a rich history of it. Over the years, though, we've Largely because of policies that incentivize offshoring jobs have chipped away at that. The 2017 tax cuts, driven by my opponent's party, gave corporations a new reason to move jobs overseas by cutting taxes on foreign profits. These corporations are essentially paying nothing to the federal government for their offshore profits. This is not only a betrayal of the middle class, but a gut punch to the very industries that built Wisconsin. We need to reverse this and bring jobs back to Wisconsin, where they belong. Small businesses are also struggling under the current tax structure. It costs about $40,000 on average to start a new business. The current deduction, $5,000. That's not enough to have a small business start up and thrive. I propose expanding this to $50,000 by giving entrepreneurs more breathing room and flexibility to build a successful business. This kind of reform will help ensure we're fostering a business-friendly environment that encourages local economic growth, not just for large corporations, but for the backbone of our communities, small businesses. My opponent still supports the failed policies of 2017, even though every reputable economist and think tank has shown it's been a disaster for the middle class. They're in effect right now. Do you feel them? If not, probably not working for you. We need to end these tax loopholes that reward offshoring and focus on creating incentives for businesses to invest here at home. Wisconsin has the talent, the work ethic, and the resources. What we need is a fair tax structure that keeps jobs here and encourages growth where it matters most, our local communities. We can't keep letting the big corporations take advantage of tax rates while the rest of us pay the price.
Thank you. We're at our last question here. Given the current national economic uncertainties that you mentioned, how would you ensure that Wisconsin's business climate remains resilient, offering stability and growth opportunities for both large corporations and small businesses?
Yeah, Wisconsin needs to be nimble and forward-thinking. We have to take advantage of emerging technologies and manufacturing, something we're not doing enough of today. Remember last year when the snow didn't come to the Northwoods? It devastated our tourism industry. This is just one example of how climate can impact our local economy. We need to focus on adjacent and complementary industries that build on our strengths, whether it's forestry, farming, manufacturing, or tourism. I believe in corporate expansion and innovation. I build a career around it, but it's not at the expense of working people. The key to a thriving economy is making sure that everyday Wisconsinites have the disposable income to support small businesses and drive Main Street economies. Triple helix investments, where education, research, and nonprofit sectors are aligned with the needs of our business community, are imperative for that success. I've led multi-million-dollar workshops that brought together these kinds of organizations to envision the future, and we need the same approach here. We need to develop adjacent industries that complement what we already have. For example, biochar for forestry products can sequester carbon and improve soil for farming. In places like Marshfield and Stratford, we can advance stainless steel fabrication by building on our current strengths. By promoting experiential and hands-on learning with our landscape, we can ensure our education system supports the workforce of the future. When we talk about economic development, we often overlook how important it is for arts, culture, and even something as simple as meeting up for a burger, beer, or fish fry are to the health of our communities. It's true, these are not just extras. They're the unseen social fabric that just makes communities vibrant and gives people a reason to stay, invest, and feel proud of where they live. Having a strong local culture where taverns, supper clubs, music venues, and galleries are is what binds neighbors together and makes small towns more than just a place to live. They become places that people want to put down roots, start a family, and start businesses. When people feel connected to their community, they're more likely to invest in it. This sense of pride and belonging encourages local spending, keeps money circulating in our towns, and ultimately drives economic growth. In Wisconsin, we have a lot to build on in this area, whether it's expanding tourism in our local food and breweries or creating spaces where artists and small businesses can gather and collaborate. Investing in the arts and entertainment is an investment in our local economy and our quality of life. It's not just about jobs, though it creates plenty. It's about fostering a culture that makes people want to stay and be part of something bigger. That's how you build thriving, resilient communities. By aligning our industries with new technologies and focusing on diversification, we can make Wisconsin's business climate both resilient and ready for growth without sacrificing the well-being of our workers and communities.
Mr. Kilbourn, it looks like our time is up, but thank you so much for your participation in tonight's forum, and best of luck on November 5th.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
How's everybody doing? We're just getting warmed up here. And so, with that, I want to welcome Congressman Tom Tiffany to the stage. Thank you so much for joining us, Congressman Tiffany. If you wouldn't mind, would you take the next 5 minutes and introduce yourself and your platform for us, please?
So first of all, I want to say thank you to the Wausau Chamber of Commerce and to WIPPS for putting on this forum. It's greatly appreciated that you would do this at election time. And I also want to say thank you to all of you for having the privilege to represent the 7th Congressional District in northern and western Wisconsin over the last 4 years. The trust that you've put in me is truly humbling. And by the way, isn't Wisconsin just the greatest state? Especially here, I mean, think about this autumn, September and October. It has been just fabulous. And there is no better state to live in, and there's no better part of Wisconsin than here in north central Wisconsin. And so it is really a great privilege to be able to represent this state. Just a brief background for those of you that may not be familiar. My wife and I, we owned a small business, Wilderness Cruises, up on the Willow Flowage for 20 years. Great privilege to be small business owners, and it's actually what got me into politics when I saw the impact of taxes and regulations, stuff like that. We raised our 3 daughters. They are now adult daughters. Unfortunately, we're empty nesters now. But it has been just a wonderful experience to be able to live our lives in a beautiful place like northern Wisconsin. So I got into politics I was elected to the state assembly in 2010. And I got in because Wisconsin had a $3 billion deficit. And I really thought it was unconscionable that the state would be running budget deficits. In other words, spending more money than what the taxpayers were giving to them. And I went on, and that was the #1 reason I ran, and we went on to pass a whole series of budgets that got Wisconsin's budget under control. And you look at it today now, and it's got the largest rainy day fund it's had, and it's really quite in good shape. And I'm really proud to have helped write 3 of those 5 budgets, went through that process. Now, you look at Washington, D.C., I've been serving there for a little over 4 years, and you see a budget that's in shambles. And the spending is causing serious problems for our country, leading to the inflation that we have. And we've got serious problems out in Washington, D.C. You look at the inflation that's happening as a result of excessive government spending. You look at our border, which I believe is the #1 issue before the American people, because our country is being transformed as we speak. I just come from a judiciary hearing, which I sit on the Judiciary Committee, that we had in Milwaukee today. And the stories you hear from people, like in Whitewater, where their school, their public school used to be the best public school in that region of southern Wisconsin, and now it has some of the lowest educational attainment because they've been overrun by migrants. And you look at the crime that's happening across the state, across the country, but including in the state. And it's because our border was unleashed on January 20th of 2021, when President Biden and Vice President Harris said, we're going to have open borders here in America. You look at the inflation that has happened as a result of the ruinous spending that's been going on. And then you look at the weakness that we see in our foreign policy. Weakness leads to war, and we are seeing much greater instability around the world, whether it's the Middle East, Ukraine, Taiwan threatened by its neighbor, Communist China. That is because of weakness with our foreign policy. And then you look at what I believe is one of the #1 reasons, and we'll get into this a little bit later, is why inflation is so bad. One of the big reasons is we're no longer energy independent. The very first action that President Biden took on January 20th, 2021 was shut down the Keystone Pipeline. It was a key signal to the world as well as people in America that we are no longer going to be energy independent in America. When America prospers, we have abundant, affordable, low-cost energy. You look at our history over the last 100 years, it's very consistent. You have low-cost energy, and Americans prosper. So we have some major challenges ahead of us. Is the timer here where I can see it?
Right there.
I'm missing it.
You're on the yellow light there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I always knew that I was going to disagree with Democrats in regards to taxes and regulations. Always knew that. The thing that I did not realize when I went to Washington, D.C., we were going to be fighting about the fundamentals of America. And especially sitting on the Judiciary Committee, I just told you about the border. We have jurisdiction in regards to the border. We have been making the case. We passed a bill to be able to secure the border, and it has not happened. President Biden, Vice President Harris have said, we are not going to secure the border. Even now, when they see the damage that's been done with the fentanyl poisonings, the unaccompanied alien children that they have no idea where they are in America, 320,000, and they have no idea where they're at, probably being human trafficked. And they're not taking care of those problems. You look at the censorship that's going on. The Department of Justice and the FBI working with the big tech companies to censor people's political speech. You see Catholics in Richmond, Virginia that are being harassed by the FBI. I never expected that the fundamentals, the Bill of Rights, the fundamental constitutional protections that we have, that is the big fight now. And I look forward to talking to you about those issues and how we can fix our problems. We all know what the problems are here in America. What
Congressman
voters
Tiffany.
want to hear now are solutions, and I hope to share those with you with the balance of our questions tonight.
Thank you so much. Sorry to interrupt. You can continue that thought as we get to the policy questions. So we're going to get into that. Given Wisconsin's challenges with retaining young talent and filling skilled labor gaps, what initiatives would you support to ensure our state develops a sustainable workforce and attracts professionals to stay and grow their careers here?
So first of all, we are overregulated in this state and in this country, and it stifles entrepreneurial activity. So often, when you see additional regulations that pass, they're always done for a noble purpose. But they oftentimes put up barriers to entry for entrepreneurs. We kill entrepreneurial activity when we overregulate. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. We should have work requirements in place. It can be done at the federal level. I'm hoping that we have a change of the presidency here, that work requirements will be implemented. We have nearly 10 million people in America that are able-bodied but are choosing not to work. And if you remember, if you voted in the April 2023 election, there was an advisory resolution on there that said, should able-bodied people have to work? By 80%, an 80-20 margin, the people of the state of Wisconsin said there should be work requirements. And there should be work requirements in part because there's plenty of job openings out there across America, and it'd be good for employers to do that. But the main reason to do it is for people's self-worth. People have greater self-worth. They see a reason why they should be why they should be a productive member of society when they work. And that is the number one reason that they should be doing that. We need to get to a legal immigration system, and it's an easy three-step process. Secure the border. I helped author the bill, H.R. 2, that passed through the House, died in the Senate. And if we'd adopt that bill and have an executive that will take the actions necessary, we can secure the border. Then put in place the work requirements, make sure that people are able-bodied that can work. And then if we have gaps yet, then let's make sure that we have a good, sane, legal immigration system. I believe in legal immigration, but that's not what's been happening here in America. That will help solve some of our problems here in Wisconsin and around the country. And if you look at the state of Wisconsin, we are actually going in the wrong direction. CEO magazine, when I went, shortly after I came in the legislature in 2011, we were ranked number 41 in the country. By the time Governor Walker left 8 years ago, 8 years into his governorship, we had moved up to number 14. We are now back down to number 30. Wisconsin is headed in the wrong direction. And another organization, WalletHub, they ranked us recently number 40 in the business climate that we have our state in comparison to the rest of the country. We're headed in the wrong direction here in Wisconsin, and there's some actions that we can take that would get us into a better place.
Thank you. You've certainly crisscrossed the 7th Congressional District, and you know that we have both rural and urban areas that need economic support. How would you ensure that economic development efforts in Wisconsin benefit the entire state, balancing the needs of both urban and rural?
I think it starts with the fundamentals. So from where I'm at in Congress, here's the things that we can do. We need to get back to balanced budgets, just like we did in Wisconsin over a decade ago. Let's get back to balanced budgets that will stop some of the inflation that's going on. Let's get back to energy independence. We get back to low-cost, affordable energy, and this economy will take off. Let's make sure that those people who are able-bodied, that they work. And let's get back to the rule of law in this country. When you look at, we have places, most district attorneys in Wisconsin do a good job. But for example, in Milwaukee County, we've had a district attorney who has been soft on crime. The same in Madison. Well, guess what you get then? You get more crime. And so you will see companies that are very concerned about locating in some cities in Wisconsin, like Milwaukee, as well as cities around the country. Think Minneapolis and St. Paul, with the downward spiral that they've had over the last few years. You have to have security for people. You have to have safety and security. So those are a few things that would be really good. I want to talk about just a couple regional things that we could do. So something that I've been involved with is in regards to rail. I became familiar with this at the state level. But I've really been urging the Canadian National Railroad to upgrade some of the rail lines that they have here in the 7th Congressional District. Because when we have good freight rail, we have a greater opportunity for businesses to come to Wisconsin, especially industrial companies. Now, they've spun off some of it to the Foxy rail line. That's been helpful, including here in Wausau. But Canadian National should divest. They should either make the investment in the rail lines that exist here in northern Wisconsin, or they should divest themselves of it because it's important for economic development. Second of all, there's a major natural gas electrical production facility that is proposed up in Superior. They thought they had all of the permits done to be able to get it done. Well, they have now been sued or denied a permit by the city of Superior after having fought their way through the federal regulatory process, which is very onerous. They finally were able to get through that, and then the city of Superior put a stop to it. That project is nearly $1 billion project for northern Wisconsin that would provide clean, reliable, affordable electricity for people in the Northland, and now that is hung up. And we have to be able to utilize our natural resources, especially for this district in northern Wisconsin. We're largely a rural district, very agricultural. I mean, think about the stuff we grow: ginseng, cranberries, all kinds of stuff that we grow, as well as some of the traditional crops and being strong in dairy, beef, stuff like that. When we put impediments in the way, they're going to be less productive. And so we need to be able to utilize our natural resources, including the incredible forestry asset that we have that can help feed those mills that we've always had here in Wisconsin.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to go to the next question. Many Wisconsin businesses feel burdened by complex regulations. What specific regulatory reform would you prioritize to reduce regulatory barriers and foster a business-friendly environment while maintaining necessary protections?
Yes, so I'm going to put one of these in this question that I might have put in the last one. I've authored a credit card bill in Washington, D.C. that there's basically a duopoly at this point with MasterCard and Visa. And if you go into a retailer, you'll see the impact of their high rates when you go into a retailer that says they have two different prices, one cash, one credit. Remember, you used to not see that very often. The exchange fees that MasterCard and Visa are charging are really exorbitant at this point. We've introduced a bill, myself and a couple other representatives in Washington, to offer additional competition to MasterCard and Visa. Because the estimates, I believe, and you could check on this, but I believe the estimate for Wisconsin is we're paying about $500 million more as Wisconsinites in exchange fees than we would if we had good competition with MasterCard and Visa. I think $500 million more in the hands of you, the consumer in Wisconsin, is better than out in Wall Street in New York. A couple other things in regards to regulatory. We need to reform the National Environmental Policy Act. Fundamental act that was put in place. Remember, we had a great environmental awakening in the late 60s, early 70s. And NEPA, as it's referred, was a landmark piece of legislation. And it was important legislation for us to make sure that we protect the environment. We wanted to make sure we had clean lakes, rivers, and streams. And, but NEPA is now being used as a weapon. We should reform the Endangered Species Act, and I'll give you a perfect example that you've all heard about, and that is wolves should be delisted here in Wisconsin and across the United States of America. The wolf has recovered. There is a slaughter that is going on here in, excuse me, in rural Wisconsin. When you're seeing, I think this year the count is there's 80 people have lost their pets to wolves. We just had a woman up in Woodruff that had a dog snagged off from her sidewalk, 15 feet from her, off from her front porch. We are seeing farmers that are having their animals harassed regularly. And the wolf belongs on the landscape, but it has recovered. And so under the Endangered Species Act, it should be delisted, and we should allow a season to happen just like we do with other wildlife species. I've introduced a bill, passed it through the House of Representatives. It's waiting in the U.S. Senate to hopefully get action, and all it would do is return management of wolves from the federal government to states. We need to do that. And the final thing that I would say is, you kind of alluded to standards. When I talk to people in regards to reforming these things like NEPA and the Endangered Species Act, people are fine, for example, business owners, with high standards, especially for our environment, both for worker safety and for the environment. They're fine with having high standards, but you got to make reasonable timelines. We are seeing projects that are taking 10, 15 years to go through the regulatory process, and it makes projects far more expensive. For example, the average cost of building a home now, this is done by the National Home Builders Association a few years ago, 25% of the cost of building a home now, on average across America, is soft cost, regulatory cost. You wonder why people can't build affordable homes? That's part of it, is the heavy regulation that is out there.
Thank you. Okay, shifting topics here. Wisconsin's corporate tax structure is often seen as less competitive than other states. What tax reforms would you advocate for to make Wisconsin more attractive to businesses while ensuring fiscal responsibility?
So first, I'm going to address this from the federal level. You may be familiar with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act that was passed by the previous administration, was about 6 or 7 years ago. That is about to expire in January of 2025. The Tax Cut and Jobs Act should be extended, and it should be extended because it was the broadest based tax relief that has been done on the federal level in a long time. For the first time, people on the lowest end of the income spectrum, they got significant tax cuts that actually raised their take-home pay, their real take-home pay, for the first time in like 20 to 30 years. It was a really important reform that gave broad-based tax reform. If it is not reinstituted or extended, I think it should be made permanent. In January of 2025, you all are going to see significant tax increases. Second thing is, the current administration, they are talking about if Vice President Harris would win the election, they're going to put additional taxes on inheritance taxes. For example, there's something called stepped-up basis that especially farmers use, small business people generally, but especially farmers use, and it allows them to be able to pass the farm on down to the next generation. And I know about this personally because I have brothers and sisters that farm, and they're talking about trying to pass it on to their sons and daughters. If this goes in place as Vice President Harris has proposed, you will see these families probably not able to pass their small businesses on to the next generation. So we need to make sure that we're not putting more inheritance taxes or reducing thresholds that would cause them to not be able to, it would cause their tax burden to be so significant they would have to sell their operation. We do not want that to happen. So those are a couple reforms that should be done. Wisconsin's tax climate could be better. There's no doubt about it. Why do people, when they retire, all walks of life, go down to Florida, Arizona? Part of the reason is the weather, let's be honest. But part of the reason is that they're not taxed on their income. We need a more competitive tax environment here in Wisconsin to retain those people. Because I ask people sometimes, would you domicile in Wisconsin, people are living in Florida or Arizona now, if we had a more competitive tax environment in Wisconsin? They're like, yes. And that's important because we could have those people here more often, because oftentimes they got to spend 6 months plus a day in Florida or Arizona. We want them up here, and if we would have a better tax environment, we could have them.
Thank you. We've reached our final question for the night, which is, given the current national economic uncertainties, how would you ensure that Wisconsin's business climate remains resilient, offering stability and growth opportunities for both large corporations and small businesses?
So first of all, I'm going to answer the question this way, from the federal level. We can be prosperous again. America's seen hard times before. It just takes the political will to do it. Secure the border, stop the ruinous spending, get back to energy independence. Low-cost, affordable energy leads to prosperity for America. Have a strong foreign policy that keeps these despots and tyrannical leaders around the world, like Vladimir Putin, from going out and attacking other countries. You need a strong America. Weakness leads to war. Do those things, and America is going to be in a much better position. But let's talk about Wisconsin specifically. Our educational system is slipping. Our educational standards are declining. And you cannot have a productive society. And we have a proud public educational system in Wisconsin. I'm a product of it. My daughters are a product of it. We need to get back to having an educational system that values education, not indoctrination. Second of all, we need to be the leader in America, or excuse me, in the upper Midwest here in terms of energy costs. Our electric costs continue to go up significantly. We are going to lose manufacturers if we continue in this direction. So let's have affordable energy. Third, we have a good healthcare system in Wisconsin. We get good quality healthcare, but it is very expensive. And there's a man right here in Wausau that's written a book on Save Your Company, a guy named Matt Ort, on how we need greater entrepreneurialism in our healthcare system, where we bring down the cost of healthcare because it's simply become unaffordable for some people. It's become, access is becoming more difficult. Talking to family, friends, and constituents, wait times are getting longer. We need more entrepreneurial activity on the healthcare front. Choice, competition, transparency in healthcare, and we will bring down the cost of healthcare. We need to make sure that we have strong prosecutors that are prosecuting crime, because there are places in Wisconsin that have slipped and people no longer want to go to those places. There should be no place in Wisconsin that people cannot visit. We need to be tough on crime. And I think this country and Wisconsin have a very bright future in front of them. But it is going to take policymakers that are going to make decisions that uphold our fundamental liberties, that understand that prosperity comes as a result of freedom, not over-regulation. And if we return more power to you, to families, to local communities, rather than Washington, D.C., you will see America prosper. I want to thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to the Chamber and WIPPS for putting this on. And I hope to earn your vote on November 5th, because America's best days can be ahead of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Tiffany. We really appreciate your participation. And best of luck on November 5th. Thank you again, Congressman Tiffany, for joining us. And we'd like at this time, if I can get on the right page, to introduce our next candidate, and we're very excited to have Mr. Leng Xiong here with us. Thank you, Mr. Xiong. We really appreciate you joining us. And we'd like you to take the first 5 minutes to just introduce yourself and your platform.
Sure. First and foremost, I just want to say a big thank you to WIPPS and the Wausau Chamber for coordinating a wonderful forum for all of us today here. My name is Leng Xiong, and I was born here in Wausau and raised in Weston by two loving refugee parents who came to the United States here to escape communism, pursue the American dream, and also to escape persecution. Now, when they made the decision to come to the United States here, they knew that they were going to have to sacrifice a lot, but they didn't realize the magnitude of what they would have to sacrifice. Within the first night that my parents decided to leave their village in Laos, my aunt stepped on a landmine and was killed instantly. They spent the next couple weeks after that in the jungle of Laos surviving on roots and mud water, and they were making their way towards their destination, which was the shores of the Mekong River. And as they made their way towards the Mekong River, there was one obstacle that was left that was preventing them from getting to the shores, and that was a communist outpost. The group leaders pulled them all aside and told them that they needed to make sure that they were quiet, and they made sure that their kids were quiet. But unfortunately, at that time there, my oldest brother was sick, and he was also hungry from their time in the jungle. And the group leaders told them that they needed to feed him opium in order to sedate him. Well, my parents didn't want to, but eventually in the end here, they gave my parents an ultimatum and said, give him an opium or be left behind, which meant certain death. My parents surrendered him over, and unfortunately, as they carried him past the communist outpost, they realized that he was no longer breathing, and they buried him on the shores of the Mekong. My parents came to the United States, and their first job was picking up worms in Marathon County parks and selling it for a couple of dollars here and there. Eventually, my mom went on to become a seamstress and went on to work in a factory and retiring from Kobe and Kobe. My father went on to work on the fields of Sue's ginseng, and then eventually went on to work at a factory, joined the local union there, and then left to work at Kobe and Kobe, where he retired there as well. Now, despite the fact that we never had much, we weren't rich, my parents taught me that regardless of what you do, you must give back to your community, even when you didn't have much. My parents, we lived paycheck to paycheck. We celebrated special occasions by going to fast food restaurants. We went to Chinese buffet when it was payday, when we celebrated special occasions, but we knew how to stretch every dollar that we can in order to ensure that we lived the American dream. Now, my parents taught me that even though you don't have much, you want to make sure that you give to your community, and that led me to doing what I do today, dedicating my entire life to community service. I worked in nonprofit my entire life. First, I worked at Faith in Action, providing services to individuals with disabilities and our elders. I went on to work at the women's community, providing services and being advocate for victims of domestic abuse, sexual assault, and human trafficking. And now, as a nonprofit executive, representative at a local nonprofit dismantling barriers for Southeast Asian community members. Now, that also led me, and my dedication to this community didn't end there, because it led me to running for office, and I was elected to the DC area school board, and then I was elected to the county board, and eventually I was served on 2 board terms on the Village of Weston board. And during my tenure on these boards, I advocated for lower taxes and the cost, and ensuring that lowering the cost of living. I worked to ensure that we had good services while ensuring good fiscal responsibility. The mill rate at the county level and the school board level dropped tremendously during my tenure there. Just like this past term here with the DC area school board, we cut a $2.7 million. And we just did another $900,000 as well. So we were able to, my goal was to make sure that we were able to maintain strong fiscal management, but also upholding our priorities and addressing challenges that our community face. We did this in a cross and bipartisan manner. Friends and oftentimes people labeled me, as a matter of fact, as annoyingly moderate due to the fact that I worked with folks from both sides to ensure that things got done. Now, I have advocated for policies that were focusing on ensuring that our communities continue to be the safest, prosperous, and most healthiest. But I also know that Wisconsinites are struggling, because I've gone out there and talked to folks and have heard about the challenges that they are experiencing. They're experiencing challenges with the cost of living, the child care crisis, housing crisis, and the need to expand health care. And the state legislature could be doing more, but it chooses not to. And that is why I'm running. I'm running to be the voice that the 85th Assembly District desperately needs in Madison.
Thank you very much for your introduction. Now let's turn to a policy question. Given Wisconsin's challenges with retaining young talent and filling skilled labor gaps, what initiatives would you support to ensure that our state, and I suppose our district, develops a sustainable workforce and attracts professionals to stay and grow their careers here?
So the Greater Wausau Prosperity Partnership here in the local area commissioned a study a couple years ago, and the Greater Wausau Prosperity is made up of nonprofit organizations, government and public organizations, and private entities. And they provided various initiatives to address the talent recruitment and labor shortage, such as developing and implementing innovative methods for talent acquisition. But they also brought recommendations to invest in our higher education system, such as our UW colleges, our technical colleges, and further enhancing our infrastructure and our amenities. However, the report also identifies several disparities and weaknesses that we had in our community, specifically deficiencies in childcare, housing, broadband access, and in the aging and declining local population specifically. So in order to overcome these challenges, it's important that we need to implement pro-family policies, resolve the childcare crisis, resolve the housing crisis, improve broadband infrastructure, and bolster support for the UW system and technical college. Because what studies have shown that when individuals often stays in areas where they receive their education. Unfortunately, the current state legislature has not done and taken those steps to address many of these issues. For example, the childcare crisis is a good example. When they were called to address this issue, they gavelled out within seconds, and they didn't provide any actual true actions on it. The only true actions that were taken was when Governor Evers allocated federal dollars to provide relief to families, and when the Marathon County Board, which I served on, allocated $200,000 to a child care cooperative that provided training to 30 additional child care workers, therefore creating 240 additional child care slots for families. And as your state representative, I will put aside partisan politics and work with folks from both sides of the aisles to address these issues and ensure that this community is the right place to live and start your family, start your business, and can let it grow.
Thank you. Mr. Xiong, you're aware that the 85th Assembly District includes both rural and urban areas, and both need economic support. How would you ensure that economic development efforts in Wisconsin and in the 85th benefit the entire state and our district, balancing the needs of both urban and rural?
So it is our responsibility as representatives to ensure that our policies are neutral. neutral, but also meets the needs of our state. However, it is the responsibility as the elected official for this district, part of my role, to advocate for the interest of our constituents. And we can do this by collaborating with individuals from various backgrounds, sectors, and employing innovative approaches to safeguard the well-being and welfare of Wisconsinites. A good example of this approach was when the county's strategy to address the broadband issue in our community here. What they did was they engaged with private partnerships with Charter and Bud Tussle to establish a public-private partnership and implemented other certain conduit bonding agreements to ensure that we can expand broadband to cover the folks in the rural area. This initiative didn't just expand it to cover rural areas, but also provided crucial services and further enhances the capabilities of our sheriff's department so that they can ensure the safety of our communities. And through these partnerships, we have been able to positively impact our community, developing jobs and attracting folks in the area here, because we're focusing on attracting telehealth, remote education, telecommuting, and therefore attracting more individuals to our community. So by being creative, we created opportunities and ensured that our economic impact development efforts greatly impact our community.
Thank you. Turning to a different topic here, many Wisconsin businesses feel burdened by complex regulations. What specific regulatory reform would you prioritize to reduce regulatory barriers and foster a business-friendly environment while maintaining necessary protections?
So Wisconsin businesses are the backbone of our state's economy. And if elected, I plan to collaborate with partners from all sectors and engage with groups and such as the Chamber and engage with our partners and the specifically the Joint Committee for Administrative Review to ensure that we are able to streamline process and make them more efficient specifically here. Moreover, it's important to note that the state legislator should ensure that there is clarity in its legislation when they are passing specific legislation, so that way there isn't room for error, and that way these laws are more precise and actually provide specific guidance for our departments. But we also need to assess the system together as a whole, because sometimes there is excessive authority that are granted to certain committees, such as the Joint Finance Committee, that creates artificial barriers that prevents progress. And we need to develop and continue an open process that aligns with the intent of the state legislator. But it's very important to note that at the end of the day here, in order to help our business grow, we need to work with folks, with partners, and work with folks from across the aisle to ensure that we are continue to develop policies that will help our businesses, our working family continue to thrive and become successful. When our businesses and our working class are successful, Wisconsin is successful.
Thank you. Now, turning to taxes, with property taxes being a significant issue for businesses, how would you address this concern to ease the burden on local businesses while maintaining essential services in Wisconsin's municipalities?
So as a local elected official here, it's important to note that in order for us to alleviate or relieve the property tax burden on local businesses, and it's important and to alleviate the tax burden on local businesses in Wisconsin, while ensuring that we have good vital services in our municipality. It's crucial for the state to be a good partner. And I say this because there has been instances when the state has failed at fulfilling its obligations. For example, the state has pledged 30% state road aid to local municipalities, but for example, Marathon County has only received 18%. Similarly, shared revenue is a good example because the government went 15 years without giving any increases in aidable revenue until 2024. Furthermore, funding for courts is another example because courts are supposed to be a primary state function, But what's been happening is they've been increasingly shifting that responsibility to local governments, particularly counties. And the state legislature has been relying on local governments to do more with fewer resources to balance its budget. This forces local government to look at other ways to fund their essential services. So if the state upholds its commitments, it would reduce the cost for both businesses and local taxpayers.
Thank you. We're on to our final question. Given the current national economic uncertainties, how would you ensure that Wisconsin's business climate remains resilient, offering stability and growth opportunities for both large corporations and small businesses?
So that's a really good question, and I have to start off by saying that while we may not feel it, the financial experts indicates that our economy is growing, performing better. With record low unemployment rates and interest and inflation rates are dropping, our economy is getting better and we are outperforming other countries. Now, it's important to note though that despite this, we have to understand that there is still obstacles that we are facing. It is crucial that we recognize that the state of Wisconsin's economy is connected with the global economy. What happens nationally, internationally impacts our local economy. Collaboration and working with our federal partners to address these issues effectively is crucial for the success of Wisconsin's economy. So for instance, our state's ginseng industry, our ginseng growers are currently facing hardships as the price of ginseng has dropped from $60 to $20 to under $20 per pound due to the tariffs. Despite our economy getting better, it's also important to note that we still have ongoing challenges within our community, and we need to address these pressing issues and concerns of a workforce shortage, a child care and housing crisis, the need to invest in our infrastructure, and fostering state workers' growth are critical. And we can do this we can do this together, but there are also other issues that we need to address in addition with what I just mentioned. We can join with the majority of states in expanding health care through the acceptance of Medicaid expansion, which would bring over $1 billion in federal investments. But we also need to leverage our state's resources, our ability to attract talent, promote recreational opportunities, and more. These are tips and these are strategies are outlined in the Greater Wausau Prosperity Partnership strategic plan that we need to look at into ensuring that we are participating in and advocating for. We need to also explore government's role and promote the proper usage of tax increment financing and other tools to support our objectives and growth. But it's also important to maintain strong fiscal management while upholding our priorities and exploring options to contribute positively to addressing these challenges. It's doable. We've done that at the Marathon County Board. We've done that at the DC Everett School Board, and we can do that at the state as well. It's important to remember that even though our economy is getting better, there are still families that are struggling and are having a hard time. And our state legislature could do more to help with these issues, these problems, like addressing the child care and housing issues, improving health care, and bringing more works to our state. And we need to invest in our most valuable asset, which is our people. And in order to do this, we need to vote for legislators and representatives who will put the best interests of the people over their party. And residents of the 85th, I humbly ask for your vote, and I will be that voice that the 85th desperately needs in Madison. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Xiong, thank you so much for your time and participation, and we wish you the best of luck on November 5th. And now, last but not least, we are equally excited to represent our final participant, Representative Pat Snyder.
Thank you, Eric.
Thank you. Representative Snyder, thanks for joining us. And we'd love to have you take the next 5 minutes to introduce yourself and your platform.
Sure, I will. Thank you. Well, a lot of you know me because this would be my 5th term if elected into the State Assembly. I grew up in Milwaukee, Northwest Side, and went to the University of Iowa, met my wife, graduated with a degree in broadcast communications and public relations. Moved here to Wausau because I wanted to get back to Wisconsin, and got here in November of 2000, I should say, and raised our 2 kids, both graduates of DC Everett High School. Now both are married with, we have 5 grandkids. Retired from radio in 2012, decided I'd try my hand at the Assembly and lost in 2012, but came back in 2016 and won, And I've been in that position for the 85th District ever since 2016. This time around, though, it is a little different. The new maps came out with the Supreme Court and with the governor, and I am still in the 85th. I was drawn out by 6 houses, and I decided that since 75% of the district that I represent was still in the 85th, that I needed to move to Weston so I could continue to represent the people I have been representing the past 8 years. Now, I will say that a lot of talk has been about working across the aisle. That's talk. I actually have a record of working across the aisle. In fact, 7 bills signed by the governor this session, including one I worked on for 3 sessions, the Hmong Education Bill, after talking with many of the veterans and the stories they tell from the secret war to fleeing the communists, to going to the refugee camps, to coming to America, a whole different culture, climate, facing bigotry. And what's amazing is they still think America's the greatest country in the world. That's impressive. That needed to be told, so I passed that bill. The Like Kin Bill. The Department of Children and Families came to me to author this bill. This allows children that are being removed from the home in a very traumatic situation to maybe not be placed with relatives close by, but be placed with families they're close with in their neighborhoods or from the school districts. It's less traumatic. I have my VOCA funding. They came to us, the women's community and the Domestic Abuse Council. In fact, I'm now a member of the Governor's Council of Domestic Abuse. They VOCA funding from the federal government, which is Victims of Crime Act. It ran out of money. They didn't fund it. They were going to lose possibility of some shelters. And they came to us, and I went to my leadership. I said, we have to come up with a Band-Aid to get them through the time before the next budget. So he passed a $10 million bill to be able to keep them afloat. And if the federal government doesn't come through, it'll be an issue we'll have to readdress during the next budget session. I also get a lot of my inspiration from people in the district. Dr. Lamont, a pediatrician, came to me with the Marathon County Medical Board and told me about the statistics of childhood asthma and how it's starting to rise. And so now we passed a bill the governor signed that will allow school districts, not a mandate, but allow them to have the inhalers for asthma in case there is a critical attack. A lot of times, first attack in a child's life happens in the grade school days. So now that'll be available to get that so it's not an emergency room trip for them. It also will allow parents to sign saying, listen, our child has asthma. If they forget their inhaler or have it run out, you have permission to use there at the schools. These are some of the bills that I was able to get through this last session. Oh, and by the way, my first bill that I co-sponsored and signed into law from the governor in January of 2019 was making pre-existing conditions mandatory for the state of Wisconsin. Just thought I'd pass that along as well. So some of the things in the district that we're facing, you know, is a cost of living increase. Hearing that at the doors a lot. It's been traumatic the last couple of years. And it doesn't matter if you're a young family or a senior retirement family on a fixed income, the tax dollars need to be used efficiently, and people should keep more of their hard-earned money, because I am a believer that the people know how to spend their money better than the government.
Thank you for that introduction. Turning to policy now, given Wisconsin's challenges with retaining young talent and filling skilled labor gaps, what initiatives would you support to ensure our state develops a sustainable workforce that attracts professionals to stay and grow their careers here?
Thank you. This past session, I've supported apprenticeship programs, tax cuts, child care reform, and affordable housing. Now, the last session, the budget, we put $7 million into apprenticeship programs. These workers who complete these apprenticeships are filling much-needed jobs, and they're well-paying jobs as well. You know, many of the workers that are facing the high cost of childcare reminds me of at the doors this past September. I ran into a gentleman that has 3 children. 2 are not of school age. So he ended up taking the 3rd shift. His wife works during the day. He works 3rd shift so he can stay home and watch his 2 kids because they don't have the finances to cover the child care costs. Not only that, he worked Labor Day, got overtime pay because he had outstanding bills he had to pay. This is a family that is living paycheck to paycheck, and stories I hear every day at the doors of many families have been suffering the past 3 years at least. So both mom and dad are under a lot of stress, care for their kids, to try to make ends meet. So it shouldn't be like that, not at all. Last session, we did pass 6 child care reform bills. Only one made it through the signature of the governor, which was the child tax credit. It doesn't make it really a big impact on the child care crisis our state's facing. So I plan to introduce a bill next session that is working successfully in the state of Michigan right now. And that is setting aside a fund to try to promote and incentivize in-home licensed daycare. Now, right now, it costs somewhere around $2,000 to $2,500 administrative to get your house ready to be licensed. Some of the fees you have to pay to become a licensed daycare operator as well. Things you need to maybe get your house in order to do that. And in order to have this grant program where we would cover those costs. And I think when you come this far north, where our daycare centers now are being overwhelmed and there's a long waiting list, to have more local in-home licensed daycare would be perfect, because if folks are home now taking care of their kids, maybe they'll take a few more in and make some money on the side as well. Plus, I think in-home licensed daycare would be a little more affordable for some of the families. So that's one bill. I still think we need a public-private partnership on that. I still tell some of my colleagues that I think it's an economic development that we need for us to look at this. But we have to look at it at fixing problems, not adding money to something that never gets fixed, because we'll never fix it. We'll just keep sending more and more money. I think tax incentives could be possible for businesses if they want to combine their forces and start a daycare for all of their employees. Now, housing, that's another major problem, as we're the 18th ranked state in property tax. Last session, I did co-sponsor 5 bills on housing initiatives that I think will lead us to more affordable basic starter homes for our young people to raise a family.
Thank you very much, Representative Snyder. And turning to the next question, in the 85th district, as you know, we have both rural and urban areas that both need economic support. How would you ensure that economic development efforts in Wisconsin benefit the entire state, balancing the needs of both urban and rural?
Well, each region of the state has their industries that excel, and as well as activities that do so, both manufacturing and also agriculture, big ones. Each budget cycle, the governor has tried to eliminate the manufacturing and ag tax credit, which we have stripped away. I would hate to see that go. That's big. That's one thing we can do to assure that, to make sure we're building a workforce to support both the rural and urban parts. And I think one area is reducing our income tax with a positive effect on both urban and rural. Listen, we're paying higher taxes than our neighbors, well, except Minnesota, but Illinois and Michigan, for goodness sakes, are paying less in taxes. Remember when we used to make fun of Illinois? Not anymore. The middle top tax bracket, the most of us fall in, ranging from $27,000 a year to some $304,000 a year, is 4.4%. We tried to pass that bracket, but the governor vetoed it. It's higher than our neighboring states. Michigan, 4.2%. I heard an ad on the radio from the Economic Development Committee of Michigan urging Wisconsin businesses to come to Michigan. That's atrocious. That shouldn't be any kind of way that we should be letting something like happen. So many Wisconsin businesses feel the burden of regulations and other issues that I suppose we can get to as well.
Thank you. Many Wisconsin businesses, as you've alluded to, feel burdened by taxes, but also complex regulations.
Yeah.
What specific regulatory reform would you prioritize to reduce regulatory barriers and foster a business-friendly environment while maintaining necessary protections?
I think one of the big ones in the past 4 years that I've heard from many constituents and helped through this process, folks that need a professional license to work their job, and that renewal process has taken months. I had a dentist from Alaska trying to come and move to Wausau to practice dentistry, and he's been waiting 6 months before he contacted my office. And then once we contacted DSPS, within a week he got his license. I've had nurses, the same situation. I had a CNA, 16 years experience in the state of Iowa as a CNA, come to Wisconsin, and they told her she would have to go back to college and spend 6 months and thousands of dollars to be able to get a CNA license in Wisconsin. That is ridiculous. How are we supposed to keep people here? How are we supposed to get them to come? So I think regulation when it comes to licensing is a big one. You know, we need to streamline the process. We did invest in the software and technology the DSPS needed, and I think that is starting to see some improvements, and it's getting better. So I'm optimal there. But I do think we have professional workers who want to work, and we have jobs waiting for them. And we have professionals in Wisconsin, in the medical field and other fields, that will be able to go over to Minnesota or down to Illinois or Iowa and practice what they're doing. But opposite, it doesn't work. And that's a holdup that I just think that, again, if we're trying to bring people in and have them raise their families, I think that's something we need to really look at. And I think another thing, too, on this to bring in families, and I thought of this now, is a lot of times kids that grow up in Wisconsin, go to school, and then leave the state, a lot of times when they get into their 30s, when they have young kids, they suddenly move back. They move back because they remember what it was like to be raised in this area. And I think somehow we need to make an effort to try to go back and find these young people and tell them to come back and live and work right here in the Wausau area. I think Tim White is doing a great job with the tourism, making this base camp. More people can work from home and enjoy the lifestyle and everything we have here in this area. And I think it's happening, which I think is part of the reason we have a little bit of a housing crisis as well.
Thank you. With property taxes being a significant issue for businesses, how would you address this concern to ease the burden on local businesses while maintaining essential services in Wisconsin's municipalities?
Well, property taxes, significant issue, again, for businesses. I remember talking years ago with a gentleman that had 2 fast food restaurants, one on Bridge Street in Wausau and one out in Rothschild. And the property taxes were $8,000 less in Rothschild. And when you have that discrepancy, sometimes, you know, it's understandable. Well, sometimes people move because of property taxes. But we did pass, finally, after a stagnant 20 years or more, a shared revenue bill this last year that will increase the money coming from the state and going to local communities. Do you know way back when it started, that the cities and counties got 90% of the taxes? 90%, and then it suddenly slowed down to what we were getting, I think it was 6% with the shared revenue. That's horrendous. So we have fixed that, at least got the fix going. The provision in the law also has the sales tax, as it goes up percentage-wise each year, that percentage is added to the shared revenue of these communities as well. So when the state does well, communities, municipalities, and the rest will do well. The city of Wausau received a 24% increase in the shared revenue. The village of Weston received a 36% increase. So what we have to look at, and what is important for our communities, is to make sure that we're supporting those services. You know, I've heard from many residents with the concern over their property taxes right now after Marathon County and the assessment that came out. That was one of the, besides the economy, one of the bigger things I heard at the doors was a property tax assessment, and they're curious to see what's going to happen come December. We need to look into how much money we're going to be collecting and where it's getting spent. And we need to make sure that our essential services, like public safety, fire, and the rest, EMS, that shared revenue goes to, will be able to be fully funded. So that's the important issue when it comes to making sure that property taxes do maintain its importance, but I'm sure glad that shared revenue has gone up, and we even get a little bit of a percentage from the brewers. So there you go.
Thank you. We've reached our final question. Given the current national economic uncertainties, how would you ensure that Wisconsin's business climate remains resilient, offering stability and growth opportunities for both large corporations and small businesses?
Well, I was very proud, and it happened during my tenure here over the years. Slowly but surely, we finally eliminated the personal property tax for businesses. That was a big one. Now we need to get our income taxes to be a little bit more competitive with our neighboring states. I mean, remember, both Illinois and Michigan are governors who are Democrat, so I don't think it's something out of the ordinary to try to at least match those states. So we need to get those in order. And we need to get workers to learn skills that are employable. Creating programs for those in the tech schools. I recently toured the NTC's Surgical Tech program, which opened up shortly. You graduate from that program and you'll be starting at $29 an hour, which is pretty darn good, especially not having maybe the crushing debt you might have in a four-year university. There are a lot of programs out there like that. There are trades that are operating. The operating engineers, who are one of my supporters, they have a tremendous job down in Coloma. They get young men and women, and they are in tremendous jobs. Pipe fitters, welders. There are a lot of opportunities to make some good money and to have sustained careers and to stay right here in central Wisconsin, which we want. So those are important, and we've seen so much success with the apprentice programs. But with the ability to work from home, we do need to make a better effort at trying to make us conductive in the broadband and Wi-Fi, so that makes it a little bit more acceptable for them. Because I was talking to a guy the other day, retired IT gentleman out of the town of Weston, and he said that he thinks a lot of the folks down in southern Wisconsin, maybe even northern Illinois, have moved up to central and northern Wisconsin and work remotely now because the lifestyle is a lot different, and to be candid, the cost of living is a lot better as well. So ways we can do to make that attractive, to make more businesses like Amazon, like Microsoft, and some of the others to come to this area is so important for the longevity and health of this community economically and emotionally and physically. So I am coming back because I am not done with things I want to be able to fix, especially in the child care side of things, and also to try to get the postpartum Medicaid expansion to 12 months. Been working at that as long as I was the Hmong education bill. So we'll try to get things like that, but I also want to make sure that I'm there for business and for the people, for their pocketbooks to be lined with more of their own money and for us to be efficient in government. So I ask for your vote to be reelected for the 85th. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Pat Snyder. We really appreciate your time tonight, and we wish you best of luck on November 5th.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's hard to believe, but we've reached the conclusion of tonight's forum. On behalf of the Wisconsin Institute for Public Policy and Service and the Greater Wausau Chamber of Commerce, we would really like to thank you for joining us. We'd also like to thank our candidates who did a wonderful job tonight, and with a special thanks to Lucas Linder, who is behind the scenes orchestrating this entire program. We thank the UWSP at Wausau. Yeah, thank you, Lucas. We also thank UWSP at Wausau and Chris Berg for their support for tonight, and we encourage all of you, all of the sponsors encourage all of us and you to get out and vote on November 5th. Best wishes.